Nyata all. It's Rueben Berg here, Gunnidsmara man, and an elected member for the Metropolitan Region of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. Hope everyone is doing okay out there. I know it's still quite a trying time and a stressful time for many with all the different things that are happening around the world. But I thought I just wanted to fill you in on what's happening with the First Peoples Assembly and the processes we've got happening at the moment. And on Thursday and Friday, we have our next Assembly Chamber meeting. So this will be our third meeting of the Chamber, and we've got some important decisions to make as part of this Chamber. So the first Chamber was back in December, and that's when we had the election of, they're welcoming to us all, the election of the directors and the chairs, and that formal kind of process. Our second meeting back in February or early March was when we then had just more of a catch up to see where things are at. And since that time, we've had a lot of our committees doing a lot of really great work, and they've put forward now some recommendations for some decisions for the Assembly to make. And I know it's been a difficult time to actually try and engage with community about some of these things. And I know there's been some sense that it might make it hard to actually make decisions at this point in time. And I respect that perspective, but I think that the decisions we are making at the moment, whilst they're important, I don't think they're too contentious at this stage. I think they're fairly kind of clear decisions that we need to make. And so I think that the conversations we have been able to have with community have given us a pretty good direction of where we want to go. But I will be open to hear what other people say at the Assembly of whether or not we have had enough consultation. But in terms of the resolutions, I thought I'd just share what my current perspective is about those, and really keen to hear what other people think about those perspectives as well. So if you do want to find out exactly what we're talking about, the agenda, I'll share it part of this link, but you can find the full agenda for our Assembly meeting and encourage you to read through that and get a sense of what it is we're going to be doing. But the key things we've got to decide on. The first one is around the interim dispute process. And excuse me here while I just turn around. I don't have a long place to walk today, but I'd rather walk along and talk, so I might turn around a couple of times. The interim dispute resolution process. This is an important mechanism to have in place as part of our negotiations with the state. And the committee working on this, I think, have put together a really good proposal. I think they've considering the importance of culture and law, and so I'm going to support that interim dispute resolution position. And so that's the first thing that's going to come up. The next element, which ties into that, is the principles for the treaty authority. So the reason it's an interim dispute resolution process is it's only until we have the treaty authority. And so the treaty authority is going to be the overarching kind of umpire to make decisions. And at this stage, all we're agreeing on is the principles for how that might look, so that then the negotiations with government can start around that authority. And I think the principles are really good. I think there's a real focus on being Aboriginal-led, a real focus on being independent, and a real focus on following appropriate cultural protocols. So I will be supporting that motion as well around the treaty authority principles. Bearing in mind again that that's not the final decision on the treaty authority, it's just the principles that we're going to start the negotiations on. The next important question is around this question, which I've had several discussions about with everybody, around whether or not there should just be one statewide treaty, whether there should be just treaties with different nations, different groups, or whether there should be a combination of those things. And all the work that's gone on so far, all the conversations, all the engagement has shown, I think, pretty clearly that everyone's preferred model is the hybrid model, the combination. And that's the model that's been recommended by the committee, which I'm also a part of, and that's been recommended by the board. And so I'll definitely be supporting that motion to say that we should be having not just one overarching treaty, not just treaty with nations or groups, but both. We need to have a statewide treaty and treaties with nations. And so that's, again, the position I'll be supporting at the Assembly Chamber. There is also then two other matters that have been raised by, not through the committees, but by individual members, which I think is really fantastic to see individual members putting up their own resolutions. And the first one draws from some of the work that's already been happening through cultural governance, is around the inclusion of additional groups. So at the moment, anyone who is a member of a registered Aboriginal party, all the registered Aboriginal parties can nominate a representative to the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. And 10 of the 11 have done that. That means, though, that not all of the state has a representative through that mechanism. And so there's a suggestion and an allowance within our constitution to say that we can come up with criteria to see how we want to include additional groups as part of that. So the resolution is just to direct the committees to come up with that criteria to see how we can actually do that. And so I support that. I support that idea of coming up with criteria, but I'm mindful of it that if we are going to come up with criteria, I think we've got to clearly articulate why it's different and how it's different and why it's a better process than just relying on the Registered Aboriginal Party system, which so far has its flaws. I know that, and I've got my own perspective on it, and part of that's probably biased by the fact that my dad used to be on the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council, but I think that so far they've been able to get 75% of the state. So when we're talking about not the whole state being represented on this, we are talking about 25%, which is still a significant amount, but the 11 seats that we do have available does cover 75% of the state. So I think that's an important thing to be mindful of. But I'd rather have 100%. That's obviously better. And if the RAP status isn't going to be achieved soon, we need to find another way to do that. And I guess one of the differences we have as the Assembly is we don't have to be as certain about the boundaries between these groups. For RAP status, they need to know the boundaries exactly, because that determines who can speak for country about cultural heritage. For our purposes, if we don't know exactly where the boundaries are, as long as there's a core country we can identify, that should be okay. And so I'm open to that idea, but I'd still want to make sure that whatever groups we recognise are inclusive and represent that broader community. It's not just one family group, it's a broader representation of that area. And I think that's a really important criteria that, from my perspective, will need to be met before we go the next step of welcoming new members through that process. But I definitely support the idea of investigating what criteria we should be using. The last motion is one around a truth commission, which is, as Jason Kelly's been doing some really fantastic work around spreading the message of what this is all about. And I think it is a really powerful part of the process for any nation to deal with what's happened in the past. And so I definitely support the idea of having a truth commission. I do have some reservations, though, about how this motion has been put forward, just in terms of the logistics of it, the administrative side of it. And so that's where I've still got some reservations. I've had some conversation with Jason, and I'll hopefully have some more before Thursday, and probably on the day as well, some more conversations. So my concern is, one, whether or not we actually have the authority as the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria and how we've been elected, whether we have the mandate to demand from the state to have a truth commission, or whether or not, as was previously discussed, that would be something on the table as part of a statewide treaty. So that when whichever group goes to negotiate a statewide treaty, one of the things they say we need to have is a truth commission. And that seems to me one way of going about it. But I think there's some validity to the idea that you actually want to hear what comes out of that truth commission before you, as part of that negotiating process, so that if you can all sit there and agree on what happened in the past, that makes the negotiations easier. So I think there's some value to that, but I think we just really need to better understand exactly what that means. Does that mean that we stop the treaty negotiating process? Do we stop, not allow treaties to happen until that truth commission? Or are they run parallel? What is the interplay between those? And to me, I think there's just too much uncertainty about it at the moment. And so I'm going to try and push for some clarity around that in the resolution. I guess still my preference is to have it as part of the framework rather than as a separate resolution, but we'll see. And I'd be interested to hear what people's views are. But again, just reinforce, I think Truth Commission is a really important thing to have. It's just exactly the details of how we get it that I think we still need to clarify. So those are the key decisions we've got to make. And as I said, that's my views on it, but really keen to hear what everyone else out there thinks. And I'll definitely take those into account. I'm not going to do a poll or anything, because I think what's really important about these processes is that the people who have the most information and have seen all the details, we need to take into account what are the interests of our community. What's our community really interested in? What are the things they actually want in terms of outcomes? And then we as Assembly members need to work out what process will get us to those outcomes. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is what are your interests? What do you think is most important to you about this whole process? Last thing I just wanted to finish off with was that I did make the decision earlier this month to resign from being on the board. So I'm no longer on the board of the First People's Assembly of Victoria. And that was for personal reasons. There's just a lot of stuff happening and it just wasn't something I felt I could continue doing. So I really did respect and appreciate the fact that I was elected onto that board, and it was a really empowering experience to being on that board. And I didn't have any concerns with the decisions we made at the board. It was just my own personal situation. I didn't feel I wanted to continue in that role. I wasn't able to continue in that role. So I'm no longer on the board, but I'm still a very active member of the First People's Assembly of Victoria in the chamber, and also an active member of the Treaty Negotiating Framework Committee. So I just wanted to make sure you all had that update too. So hopefully you found that interesting to hear about what we're talking about. And again, really would appreciate your feedback and thoughts, and really hope you tune in on Thursday to watch the live stream to see what's going on with the First People's Assembly of Victoria. All right, thanks everyone. Have a fantastic day. Well, look.